Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of the Video Vantage podcast. My name is Haley, and once again, I'm joined by my co host, Mike. And this week, we're talking about the tools that you need to excel at internal communications. So, we'll go over some of the tools that we use here at Biteable and how we use them, and we'll talk about some tools that we've used in the past and maybe really enjoyed. Mike, thank you so much for joining me for another week.
Awesome, Haley. Great to be back.
So I figured, as usual, we'd get right into it. And I think one of the most common tools that people use for internal comms is some sort of internal messaging chat system like
hmm
Slack or Teams. Personally, at Biteable, we're using Slack and kind of use it for all of our internal discussions, especially as a fully remote team.
Yeah.
Have you used Teams in the past? Do you have a preference on the two, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I have used Teams in the past. The last company I worked for, we started to use it because basically it was a Microsoft Office Outlook oriented office, and so we weren't. I mean, it was just kind of like the natural one to go to,
Yeah.
but we couldn't get a lot of traction with it.
Oh, interesting.
And we actually just shifted over to Slack because that seemed to be a little more robust at the time. I mean, this is several years ago, but I haven't really used Teams too much other than that. But most people I know in my extended circle of former coworkers and colleagues and friends are all on Slack. So
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. It seems, especially among the tech companies, more popular where they're kind of like the Google organizations and they'll use Slack. So, seems to be a little bit easier to use from my experience too. And I
yeah,
love how on our Slack channels, especially, we have them quite well organized depending on like what the discussion topic is. But one thing that I've seen is really cool that a lot of organizations do is they'll have some sort of non-work related channel where people can either kind of show off what they did over the weekend or like their family updates and celebrating kind of their personal wins, which I think is so cool. So we have those two, random and also home life, which
hmm
you just used to showcase your Eras Tour experience. Have you seen those channels in a lot of other companies too, kind of the non-work related spaces?
yeah. I'm in Slack for a couple of other like just like general like marketing discussion groups.
Yeah,
Um, that are more open to like either they're invite only or you can click on some link and join a group Slack, to public Slack. Um, but I think whether it's work related or if it's like industry related, having those I have seen those non work channels out there, and
hmm,
I see them a lot actually on a bunch of discords as well. So like if you're in a discord for a certain topic, it's a great way to have and foster and build a sense of community
yeah,
where you're not talking about work or the topic of the server, but you're talking about photography or you're talking about your kids or homes or whatever it is, right? And I think that's just a super great way to build more of that rapport and that relationship with people, especially in a remote setting that you're not going to have like that, the water cooler or
yeah,
the coffee run type of chat and conversation that you might normally have to build relationships with people, but now you can have
totally.
it in those channels.
Yeah, I feel like, especially in a remote environment, you kind of have to make it more intentional to kind of, like you said, have those water cooler conversations because you're not going to have the random run ins in the hallway. You just have to kind of put yourself out there in Slack. And funny that you mentioned Discord. I've actually never used it before, but I've seen some organizations are now using Discord instead of Slack in Teams. Does it have
Yeah.
kind of the same capabilities?
It's very similar. So if you're familiar with Teams or Slack, and I
Yeah.
just to go back a second, like when I said I don't use Teams, I'm not like anti
Oh,
Teams.
yeah,
I just don't use it.
of
But
course.
I
Yep.
know I know plenty of people who do. But if you're familiar with Slack or Teams, then going to Discord is going to be like a walk in the park, just smooth sailing
Interesting.
getting into it. It has the same type of like channels and DMs and support for emojis and GIFs and all that stuff, right?
Wow.
Um, I think a lot of people use it because it's free
Okay.
and it doesn't have some of the limitations that maybe like the free version of Slack has, which I totally
Sure.
understand why they have it. Like, you can only search back X number of days in a free
Yeah.
version of Slack or whatever, right? But in Discord, um, those limitations really aren't there, right? And
Oh,
now you can
interesting.
pay for a Discord to get, more emojis, or more badges that you can use and customization, that type of thing. But I used to use the free version on several different servers that I'm a part of, and it works just fine.
Really? Okay, so it might be a great tool for those smaller companies that are kind of just getting started and they don't want to make the investment right now, or they just don't have enough people that it makes sense to make that investment.
Yeah, and so for example, like if you don't want to make the investment in Slack, or if I know we're talking about mostly internal communications, but if you're building a community and you want to have a chat, Discord's a great
Yeah,
place to go because
totally.
it's web based. You don't have to have a special app. You can, but you don't have to. And it works really great.
I love that. And then we also are big users of Zoom or Google Meet, whether it's for just kind of like weekly team meetings, one-on-one meetings, or company-wide kind of internal Ask Me Anything sessions, or our
Mhm.
monthly all hands as well, which I think those are pretty normal use cases for both of those platforms. But I think we've also done a really good job, especially as a remote team, of using both of those for kind of like those more fun interactions instead of going to grab a lunch with your coworker. We just had a coworker host a 90s trivia session over
Mhm.
Zoom a few weeks ago. So I think there's kind of like a lot of creative ways that you can use those two tools as well internally.
Yeah, what's your thought on? Do you have a preference of when you like to use one over the other?
It's a good question. I like how Google Meet for me is always very simple to join. It's just like one button kind of there. But personally, I always have trouble sharing my screen on Google Meet. For whatever reason, the permissions just don't love my computer. I'm sure it's a me problem, but I haven't gotten to the root of it yet. So I find if I'm doing something where I need to be actively sharing my screen or using like a whiteboarding feature, or in general, just meeting with a larger group of people, I kind of gravitate towards Zoom. But if it's a pretty impromptu, kind of like quick touch base, or there's only me and maybe like two or three other people in the call, Google Meet is kind of my go-to for that one.
Yeah, yeah, I find that like for a lot of just the majority of like the one-on-ones that I have, with a marketing team and other
Yeah,
folks, Google Meet is really straightforward.
totally.
I also kind of like, just to be honest, like I also kind of struggle with the screen sharing thing.
Okay,
Um,
I'm glad you said that.
and I can't tell you how many meetings in Google Meet that I've accidentally closed and ended
I
when I
was
was
just
like
gonna say,
stopping. I'm like, oh, I want to stop sharing my screen, and I clicked the hang up button on accident. I'm like, oh
yes.
wait, because I use two different monitors. I'm like, oh, I should have clicked the button over here, and I click that one. And,
Or
uh,
you're just closing too many tabs and you accidentally close the Google Meet tab and then you're just out of the meeting. I've done
yeah,
that to you a few times where all of a sudden in our one-on-one, I'm just no longer there.
just like goodbye, we're over, we're
Yeah,
done. Yeah,
didn't like what you said, so I'm just gonna leave.
no goodbye, just over. Yeah.
Yeah, I do actually. That's a funny thing you say that. I always am accustomed to the way Zoom, you have to press the button twice to leave the call. So you'll
Mm,
click like end session, and then it's like, are you sure you want to end the session? And you say yes. But on Google Meet, it's just end the session and you're gone. So normally I will like click end as I'm saying goodbye, knowing that I still have another click to go. But if I do that on Google Meet, then it really results in me leaving before I've said goodbye.
so I used to have this whole like anxiety around the leaving the Zoom meeting, right? Where I wasn't the first one to leave because I'm like, oh,
You don't
like
want to be the last one either.
someone like else was like really fast at getting out of that meeting, and I'm like, all right, goodbye, and then all of a sudden I'm like, they're gone. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
know it takes a couple clicks. They were like their finger on the button. I'm like, what is this? But anyways,
That's me. I've got my finger on the button. Now, jumping into our next tool, I think this is probably the biggest one that we use here at Biteable, and I think it's gained a lot of popularity recently among especially remote organizations, but Notion, which
mm,
we use for just absolutely everything
everything,
at Biteable.
everything. Yeah.
It stems from like our internal wiki where we have a homepage for new employees to join and kind of read up about the company, the tools we use, and a little bit about the history. And like it is also home to FAQs if they have questions about how things work at Biteable. But also every team at Biteable has their own kind of chapter in Notion when you can go in and see what they're working on. Notes are kept there, projects are kept there. You can see how everybody's tracking towards their goals. We really just do everything in Notion.
Yeah, I mean, Notion was new to me when I joined Bitable,
Me too.
and I struggled with it at first
Yeah.
until like I don't even know what the event was, but something just clicked for me of like, oh, now I get it. Right? Here's how I can, search things for better, or here's how like pages are organized. Here's how databases work inside of Notion. And like for us, it's really replaced a lot of other tools. Like we used
Yeah.
to use for project management, we used another tool, and it was like really structured. And it was like, oh, but we're doing half of our work in Notion for like documenting what the copy should be in that page or the assets, and like it just made no sense to have two different tools. And we spend a little bit of time customizing it so we have this like, great database of like, hey, here's what we're working on now, here's what's coming up next, and we'll do this thing later.
Yeah.
And the cards are all organized, you can tag people, the conversations are like all like now contextualized for the project or the
Yes.
task. um, to me it's indispensable, and I've actually started using Notion a lot in my personal life as well, like
Me too.
organizing. We had a family trip last or earlier this summer, I organized a lot of that in there. I keep track of a bunch of different things there. I'm really into fantasy football, so I keep track of like all my stats and what I'm doing over in the rules and stuff in Notion, and it's just a great tool, I think, just in general.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I would say personally, I've started using it on my own as well. And I also used it to plan a trip, kind of had like a shared calendar in there where everybody could go in and add the things that they booked so we all could see everything. I feel like I'm not even using Notion to its fullest extent because there's so many different things that you can do
Hmm.
within the platform. But you are the Notion king of finding different templates that will work in a page, and all of the pages look so beautiful, whereas I just kind of stick to my numbered lists and bullet pointed lists.
I started getting like OCD about like, okay, I'm gonna make a toggle list so I can kind of collapse things, and I'm gonna organize it this way and have a table of contents and use the headers and the headings and all that stuff. But um, I don't know. I'll go through a little bit of extra effort,
Yeah.
custom tags and the cross referencing, because I think putting a little bit of time up front into
Yep.
organizing it can just make your workflow later so much easier, in my opinion.
I completely agree, especially when you're working with so many different people too and across organizations, then you don't have to explain any of it to them. It makes it a lot more easily digestible for anybody kind of going in and taking a look there.
Yeah, no, I'm a huge fan.
Me too. Completely love it. We have time for one more tool. So, of course, I want to end with our own Biteable. Do you
Hmm.
want to share some ideas of how people can use Biteable for internal comms? Maybe how we've even used it for internal comms at Biteable?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things I've seen at a lot of organizations that I've worked at over the years is that you're doing a weekly update or a monthly update, or you're doing a kickoff, or you have a request for something. And a lot of times I've seen that be like a deck, right?
Yeah.
It's a PowerPoint deck, it's a Google slide deck, and people just kind of thumb through it on their own time. Um, and there's some benefits of that, right? You can take your time and read a page or whatever. You go back and forth really easily in a deck. But what I've always struggled with those tools is sometimes um, the enthusiasm or the intent, the tone of voice doesn't come across, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, what I like about using Biteable is that like I can make a slide or a scene, right, where I have some text on it that's describing something, and the Biteable editor will automatically figure out like how, based on how much text is in this scene, how long should we play it, right?
Yep.
So the reader isn't like the viewer isn't rushed through it or having to pause a whole bunch of times or rewind it. Um, and then I can also add voiceover, so I can actually like not read the scene or the text to you, but actually
Yep.
give a different summary and have a more condensed, summary of the topic on the scene. And then also you can interject and record yourself and put, a video of yourself saying, "Hey Haley, this is why I have this request," or like, "Hey, here, this is why this is important to know." And you can really drive home and complement the information you're sharing with a video of yourself in the video. And then unlike a deck, Biteable will actually show you like, oh, here's where it was watched, right? It was watched in these cities,
Yep.
these countries. how many times, and you can put a CTA at the end of it to click to go to our Notion page for more information, right? So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with it. So
Yeah.
shameless plug, but love it.
We had to have it, especially at the end. And we use it at Biteable. Brent is our CEO and also one of our Biteable super users, of course. But every week, every Sunday, he'll share kind of like a weekly look forward. Here's what's coming this week. Here's what our focus is. Here's the goal we're working on. And it's normally just like a between 30 seconds and maybe 2 minutes of a
Hmm.
video, kind of letting everybody know what's coming up. But another way that we use it, which I really love, is when a product team has a launch. A lot of time they'll use the screen recording tool to kind of show us how their new feature launch works. So it's just really great to kind of like keep everybody informed, show them what's going on, but it's a bit more engaging than your typical Slack message.
I think it's totally more engaging. I mean, there's a reason that video is so popular, just in
Completely
general,
agree.
right? And I think a lot of the challenges that people have, and kind of touched on this a little bit with Notion, is that sometimes it can be daunting to get started and to really, you know, feel like you're in control of it, right? In
Yeah,
command of it. The same can be said about making a video. And I think one of the nice things that Biteable does is it actually kind of makes those creation tools and the editing tools
yeah,
and adding animations and modifying them and all that stuff. It just makes it a lot easier for the average user who doesn't have a bunch of time working with a full non-linear editor like a Final Cut or a Premiere or an Avid.
yeah,
Right? If you can make a deck in PowerPoint, you can jump into Biteable and be very comfortable and create something that's much more engaging than
absolutely.
the average presentation.
I completely agree. And I think that's the perfect way for us to end is with a shameless plug. Mike, thank you for joining me for another week of the Video Vantage, and thank you for everybody for tuning in. We will see you next week.